Hey guys, Joyboy here. So I've got a fairly long post for you today. This one is going to be very interesting, be really relevant to important points in the future of One Piece, and I think be something that you guys want to stay tuned for. So let's get right into it. So this video is going to be about really one main topic and two side topics. The main topic being what was Roger's vision? Why did he start the Great Pirate Age? Why does he want people to look for the One Piece? Why did he even make the One Piece? And then related to that is, what are some things that we can figure out that other big name pirates know about Roger's plan? And then also a little bit of looking into Whitebeard's lines when he said that One Piece does exist, and the speech that he made before then. He let some things out of the bag that are definitely very interesting and could foreshadow some really cool stuff. Alright, so I think it's important to start here, which is what exactly is the One Piece? And I think that there's a lot of thoughts out there as to what could potentially be part of the One Piece, but the one definite thing, and I really do think that this is definite, is that at least part of the One Piece is the Rio Poneglyph. And I say this for a couple reasons. I've said this in a couple of videos, but I'm going to say it again. Robin basically let the cat out of the bag during the end of the Skypiea arc, where she finds Gold Roger's message carved into the pillar, the golden pillar next to the poneglyph, where basically he said he followed the poneglyph to its farthest reaches, and then she surmises that basically from this one line that Gold Roger took all of the poneglyphs and the information that he had found along his journey and brought them to one place which she determined to be Raftel. So basically all the contents of all the poneglyphs that Gold Roger found were taken with him and basically placed in Raftel. We also know that the One Piece is in Raftel. If you put 1 and 2 together, it highly insinuates that the Rio Poneglyph is at the very least part of the One Piece. This is of course assuming that Robin is right and in her analysis. So now that we know at least part of what the contents of the One Piece is, some other things about One Piece can actually be explained given this, and it basically puts some details together, which is that the poneglyphs, they contain information about the ancient kingdom. If the poneglyphs and the information on them are part of Roger's treasure, then we can assume that Roger valued this information that he found on them. And so what's really, I think, important about this whole thing is that the ancient kingdom, there was a purpose left for leaving the poneglyphs where people could find them, which is that they had ideals in which they wanted to protect, history and ideals that they wanted to protect, and allow future generations to uncover them and do something about it, probably. So we know that the organization, or the group now called the World Government, and the Ancient Kingdom, which no longer existed, fought during the Void Century over clashing ideals, apparently, and then ultimately what ended up happening was, because of the ideals that the Ancient Kingdom had, the World Government then tried to erase their history and existence from the world completely. But the Ancient Kingdom basically one-upped them by putting all of this information on indestructible stones, which the world government could not destroy, and also they were hidden from the world government as much as possible so that one day someone would be able to read them and then do something about it. If you guys have been following me, you'll know that I've done a theory about a particular ideal which could have been the source of conflict between the world government and the ancient kingdom, which was slavery against the non-human groups. Basically, we know that the ancient kingdom was friends with the non-humans, the fishmen, the dwarves, the minks, etc., whereas the world government has both historically, as in the past, they have enslaved these groups, and then even up until recently, we can see that the celestial dragons still put a very high price on things like giants and mermaids. So this gives us a sense of what this conflict could be all about, and explain why someone like Roger, who's reading these poneglyphs, might be inspired to take on this fight versus the world government for the ancient kingdom, which the ancient kingdom lost during the Void Century. However, I think it's pretty clear that Roger didn't succeed, and we know this because nothing has changed. The world government is still doing its thing and Roger is dead. And I think that the reason why it didn't work out for Roger was probably, there's two main things. The first thing being that he got sick, and thus he ran out of time. And the other issue is probably that Roger couldn't find all of the necessary pieces he needed to in order to affect this sort of change. This will be another theory that I'm doing, but just keep that in mind. I don't think that Roger could succeed in basically taking out the problem. And so he carried his will on to the next generation. And so keeping in mind that these poneglyphs are part of Roger's treasure, this fully explains why the One Piece exists and why Roger started the Great Pirate Era, which is to say that basically Roger created the One Piece, or the idea of the One Piece, which was his treasure, and basically said that, if you want to follow in my footsteps, if you want to be as great as I am, then you should go out and seek this treasure. But he doesn't actually say what it is. He just leaves it open-ended to sort of get everyone curious as to what it could be, inspire their imaginations, and inspire them to go out and become pirates. And I think that he did this because this is the best way to get someone else to find the poneglyphs naturally as they're journeying through the Grand Line, and find the same sort of information that he did, so that they could potentially carry on the Ancient Kingdom's will, and which is also Roger's will, which is to basically fight for the rights of the non-human groups and what other ideals that the Ancient Kingdom potentially stood for. So basically, I think that Roger initiated the Great Pirate Era. He created the One Piece and the journey for it to look for that specific individual who would follow his guidance, start journeying the Grand Line, and then find the poneglyphs, piece them together just like he had, and then eventually carry on his will and the Ancient Kingdom's will of fighting back against the world government. This is what I believe. And it's pretty clear at this point, given that we're reading a story about him, that Luffy is this person that Roger was looking for. So with this being said, let's go to a different topic, which is that Whitebeard insinuated in a panel back in the Marineford arc shortly before he died that Roger was looking for a D. And I say this because he says that Blackbeard isn't the one that Roger was looking for. Whitebeard says this, and then just before then he was talking about the lineage of the D. And then Blackbeard is also a D. So basically Blackbeard was not the D Roger was looking for. But firstly, consider how much Whitebeard seems to know in this situation. He knows who Roger was looking for, that Roger was looking for someone, and that someone is probably going to be a D. And we also know that Roger and Whitebeard had a conversation in the past before Roger died, in which basically Roger asked Whitebeard if he wants to know where Raftel is, and Whitebeard says no. But I'm assuming that there is more to this conversation. And I think that during this time, Roger explained to him what he wanted, basically what his will was, what his desires were, and all of this that I've explained about the poneglyphs. I think that he expressed this to Whitebeard in some way. So with this being said, I think that it's very possible that Whitebeard was somehow helping Roger by basically trying to find this person that Roger was waiting for, this D. Keep in mind that we know that Monkey D. Luffy is the person that Roger was waiting for, but to others it's definitely not clear who it could be. So if we've narrowed it down to a D, there's several Ds out there who could possibly be candidates. One of those specifically would be Ace, especially since Ace was Roger's son. And I think that Whitebeard potentially was actually recruited Ace and bringing Ace along and being his father in order to prepare him for whatever the future was going to hold in as far as Roger's will, which is to say that Whitebeard was trying to make sure that Ace was the person that Roger was waiting for. We can even see this foreshadowed a bit during the Marineford arc, where we see that Squardo, being misled by Akainu, stabs Whitebeard. And afterwards they make peace or whatever, but Squardo says that, you're trying to make Ace into the Pirate King, and you value Ace more than all of everyone else part of the Whitebeard crew. And while Whitebeard says that, you're wrong, because I value you all. You are all my children, and I would never sacrifice you. He doesn't dispute the point that was made, which is that he values Ace more, and also it was specifically mentioned that he was trying to make Ace the Pirate King, and Whitebeard does not dispute this in the slightest. And I think that this is very interesting, and it very possibly could be true. Maybe Whitebeard was trying to make Ace to be the Pirate King. Remember that being the Pirate King is highly associated with finding the One Piece, and we know that Roger is looking for someone, looking for a D, and Whitebeard may know about this and may have been preparing Ace to be this person that Roger was looking for, and ultimately preparing Ace to be the person who finds the One Piece, which, as we've stated, the One Piece is at least partly comprised of the Rio Poneglyph and the knowledge that is contained on those, so ultimately preparing Ace to be the person to carry on the will of the ancient kingdom and eventually rise up and take down the world government. So yeah, that was a lot. I'm glad I got that out. I hope that you can see the connection that I've made there. But let's drift off into another related topic, which is that Whitebeard seems to know where Roger was going with his plans. Is there anyone else who's shown that they potentially know something about, what his goals were? And I think there is, and I think that person is Shanks. We know that Shanks is the person who inspired Monkey D. Luffy to become a pirate. And while it's not clear whether he did that knowingly, to the idea that Roger was looking for a D, but we have a line later where Shanks was talking to Whitebeard, and I think this very clearly shows what Shanks is doing, which is that Whitebeard asks what happened to Shanks' arm, and Shanks says he bet it on the New Era. And we've seen the title New Era thrown around in a lot of different places, but in this case it's pretty clear that by New Era he means that the changing of the guard, basically that Roger had a dream, but he couldn't complete that dream, so he passed it on to the next generation. Possibly he passed it on to Shanks, then Shanks had the dream, and then maybe at some point Shanks realized that he wasn't the person that could fulfill this objective that Roger had, so Shanks passed it to the next generation, and that generation would be Luffy's generation. So when he says that he bet his arm on the new generation or the New Era, he bet his arm on the new generation, or that his dreams or his goals or his will would be completed by the person that he donated his arm to, which would be Luffy. So I think that this very clearly implies that Shanks knows what Gold Roger's ultimate goal was, what his will was, and may have been at least on one occasion actively looking for the D that Roger was waiting for. So now for the last topic of this video, and see if I can get this out as quick as I can, this is basically, why would Roger be looking for specifically a D? Let's start at the beginning, which is, what do we know about Roger? Well, we know that Roger wants people to find the One Piece. That's why on his with his dying breath he exclaimed that his treasure could be found at a specific location. What we also know now is that in order to find Raftel, you need to be able to find the poneglyphs, which is that the 4 road poneglyphs will reveal the island of Raftel, which means that basically you need to be able to interpret the poneglyphs to find the One Piece. And so this all ties back to the person that Roger was looking for. If the real poneglyph is Roger's treasure, then whoever he's recruiting or looking for has to be able to interpret the poneglyphs. And what I find to be most interesting about this is that, how did Roger himself interpret the poneglyphs? Well, it's stated by Rayleigh that Roger could hear the voice of all creation, and this was what allowed him to hear and understand what the poneglyphs were saying. And so I think that it's very likely to assume here that maybe Roger was looking for another person like himself. And what is the easiest way to be able to interpret the poneglyphs? It might actually be to have the same ability that Roger has, which is the voice of all creations. I know that there are some people that don't follow this. Robin, a scholar from Ohara, was she could actually read the poneglyphs. And then we have Odin, Kozuki, and potentially Momo, it was passed down through their lineage how to both write the characters and read them. But other than that, the only way to naturally run into a poneglyph and be able to interpret it is to have the same ability as Roger. So I think that when Whitebeard says that he's looking for a D, I think it's because the voice of all creation is going to be associated with the family of D. And as I've said in a previous post, Right now there's a huge correlation between who potentially possesses the voice of all things and the family of D. We have Roger, who's a D. We have Luffy, who's a D. Possibly Law, who's a D. And then we have Momonosuke and Odin, who, although aren't confirmed as Ds yet, are highly associated with the Ancient Kingdom, which the Ancient Kingdom is also highly associated with the family of D. So it wouldn't be surprising if both Momo and Odin were Ds as well. But not only that, besides having the ability to understand the poneglyphs, this person also has to have the will and desire to act upon the knowledge that they would receive from the poneglyphs, which is why, although Blackbeard is a D, and it's possible that he possesses the voice of all creation, although I don't think he does, but it's possible that he does, he would not be the person that Roger is looking for, because he doesn't not value or would not value the information obtained on the poneglyphs. He wouldn't go and act in order to fulfill the will of the Ancient Kingdom and ultimately Roger's will. But anyway, I'm going to cut this post off here. This was a huge theory. This is hugely important to One Piece. I know I kind of sprung this on you all of a sudden. There's a lot of information packed with this, but I think it's really cool, really important. And for those of you who made it to the end, I'm really appreciative that you did. So if anyone is still listening at this point, comment if you have anything that you want to say. If you agree